to this Fireside Chat by AgileThought. My name is Dan Newman. I'm a principal consultant for Team Agility with AgileThought, joined by my colleague Andrea Floyd, who's a principal of Enterprise Agility, and two guests from VyStar Credit Union, Michael O'Reilly, who is a VP of Digital Experience, and Joe Kolka, SVP of Digital Experience, also at VyStar. So thank you all for joining today.
So happy to be here.
We're happy to be here as well.
Wonderful. Our theme today that we're going to be exploring is lessons from an Agile journey. And you folks have been on multiple Agile journeys, as have Andrea and I, and we're really interested in hearing from you folks about some of the things you've learned as part of your Agile journey, whether at your current place or at previous places. So maybe we'll just start with, what are some things that have surprised you in general?
I think,
I guess,
yeah, I'll go first. I think one of the things that isn't a surprise, but maybe the magnitude was surprising, would be how difficult change can be, and there's so many factors that go into it. But to me, change starts as, well, I mean, you can just kind of do the thing different. And then it's like, oh my gosh, that is not just a technique, it's a mindset, it's a culture, it's everything. And when they start compounding is when it really starts to feel like, they talk about the J curve of change management, right? And it just gets so much into what that actually means. It's not just, here's a new procedure, follow different, right?
Yeah,
for sure.
I think I would add to what Michael had on there is, I think this is my journey here with VyStar. This is probably my 6th or 7th take at a Agile transformation. And I think the thing that there's definitely similarities, but every single one of them has been different. The things that have bubbled up as kind of either challenges or surprises has really been different in each scenario. So I think we talk about Agile, and it's really, it's how do you drive better products faster to the market and really delivery, but it's a people game, right? And the people that are involved really drive the necessity of how you want to approach this. And I think one of the biggest learnings I think we've had here, and just kind of the prior ones, is over communication is probably one of your biggest friends.
You both mentioned people. Change is impacting people, and as you just shared, Joe, through your 6 different journeys, often people are at the heart of the impact, right? And what have you guys, in some of your journeys, when you're talking about people, have you found that there's this recipe that, if you mentioned communication, Joe, but is there a recipe that first you inform and then you take them on some training around what is going to be different and how they're going to show up in the new world and what that means to them beyond just their job? Have you leveraged anything that you found sort of set a good foundation for that upcoming change?
Wow. I think with it being so people oriented, I think a lot of it also depends. I think what I've run into, at least, is the maturity of each organization and each team that we've done it with. So some of them have been, we did training up front. Others where they were relatively well informed of it, but a lot of it was focused on setting expectations, like, hey, my job is ABC today, tomorrow it's going to be CDE, and how do I really what does that mean for me? How do I adapt for it? What does success look for me in the new world as I go through? How will I know I'm doing a good job? I think we look at where VyStar is. I think we were a little bit earlier in the learning curve of some of these pieces, and I think we spent a lot of time on, I would say, training up front. Maybe, but I think as we reflect back, I think we could have done more. I think training to really help folks understand the different pieces. So I think specifically on this part here, but yeah, I think it's really understanding. I would think before you even kind of assess all of it, is kind of starting off with some form of assessment of where are you at right now? How do people understand it within the teams? How the supporting cast that's around that, like the people who won't be involved, let's say, in the transformation of itself, how they need to get involved. And I think really the bottom up and top down kind of expectation settings, like, what is it we're taking? What are you going to drive? How does your senior leadership team understand what you're taking? And how does the team understand what their commitments are and where they come together? I would love to say there was some magic sauce we've had in each one of these that's made it, once I've gone through them, perfect, but it's been, yeah, I think kind of understanding it's kind of like who's on the boat and then going from there.
Yeah, I just to echo that, I think the secret ingredient is there's no secret ingredient. If there was a recipe book, someone would publish it and sell it, and and everybody would get on board. But I think for me, the people, the people are the starting point. They're not the only thing to care about, especially in a culture or an industry, in our case, financial industry, that's heavily regulated and has a culture of conservatism or risk aversion. And we just have to come at that a little differently. And then people who are trained in that culture and in that mindset just really need some help to get through some of those early changes and early modifications in approach and thinking. And then, of course, if you don't have the kind of support you're looking for, either from above or from below or from the sides, then it compounds. It's a little harder then.
You'd mentioned a couple of things in there, Joe. You'd mentioned maybe starting with an assessment and also the importance of training people, and then also acknowledge that it's not just about learning a new skill, it's about learning a new mindset. Have there been any things you've seen related to assessing and really figuring out what the mindset or the culture of the organization is that have been helpful?
Yeah, I think as we look at assessment, I think there's like the formal assessment. You can say, okay, heck, here's the questionnaire you go through. But I think the other part of assessment, and I think I think we jumped into like the formal piece pretty quickly. I think we informally did some of the other form of assessments, and I think the other part I'm kind of leaning towards thinking through, it's maybe the one-on-ones, right? Kind of sitting down with folks, hey, we're going to make this kind of transformation, we're going to go down this path, and I think assessing kind of what their point of view is on it, what they see as some of their weaknesses. I think at times, and I think we even saw a little bit of this ourselves, like you get so excited and kind of driving some major transformation and a change that I think you sometimes you get wrapped up in that, and you may not put some of that focus on up front. I think it's one that we've been trying to circle back to and address. That I think that's one, we keep talking about people over and over again here. I think just how do you manage and understand the expectations? Because I think some folks love change. Like I'm a person that I thrive in ambiguity, but I know that's not the same for everyone else. So some folks want a little bit more of a plotted path of going through it. So I think it's trying to take yourself out of the equation and see like how does the group around you kind of surface it.
To just add on to that, I think personally coming into organizations that are going through this change, this moment in time, it often has helped me to talk to different people, because what I've learned is people are looking for, well, what's in it for me? Why should I care? And we know everybody's unique, right? So that is almost a like tailored conversation. I think it goes back to something you said, Joe, almost this one-on-one. And I know from an AgileThought perspective, we have this credo: meeting people where they're at, meeting clients where they're at. And in order to engage people and pull them or help them along the journey, is to answer those questions that are most important to them. Like, how does this impact me? Why do I care? And as you guys have been working with your teams, have you seen any themes like sort of bubble to the top where you've learned that most people start from this angle, and if I can share the why behind this, that's where I can get them to turn into advocates?
I think so. I think that there is definitely that layer, especially with regards to the what's in it for me, like you said, when we're talking with a team that's being reformed or transformed or what have you. There's definitely the how does my day-to-day job get impacted, right? What I am a business analyst, I'm going to be a product owner. What does that look like? Or whatever the scenario is. But then you contrast that with, say, someone who is in a management position. What happens to my job when Scrum teams are self-organized and don't need a command and control structure to tell them what to do every day. And then even beyond that, if you've got your executive leadership saying, I want XYZ better, faster, cheaper, whatever, and how do we layer in those conversation points and all those concerns?
Yeah, I think Michael hit it really well. I think the other parts, I think I think one thing kind of approaching this is there's not a set path, right? And I think you've got to be a little bit uncomfortable with everything is a trial and error as you're going through all of this. And you may take a path for 4 weeks, get some feedback and I think change through. We've done a lot of that through our journey as we've been trying to take the different feedback in, because we haven't had a consistent group either. So we've had different folks come in and out as we've gone through the journey. And it's required us to kind of maybe pivot a little bit more frequently than I think we would have liked, and some of the pieces. And I think the other kind of parts that are in there, I think especially with where we are at VyStar, I think what things we've done a lot really focusing on how this is going to drive better value for the members and over time, and we get better products. And we had our first kind of product launch last year, and then we kind of up the game onto a larger initiative. And we've got a couple different flights going, but I think the piece that's in there, in addition to just this, hey, we're going to drive better, faster software, better, and ultimately better experiences to our members, better speed to market, right? Which in turn, trickles down to the balance sheet, either from a revenue or an expense standpoint. I think the part in there that's been sometimes hard to articulate, because I think folks see that part, like, hey, where's my thing that I get? Part of this too is a learning experience. It's a trial and error. And as you're kind of shifting like a little bit more like, hey, I'm putting more onus on individuals and kind of shifting the let's say the decision-making process, right? And ownership of those pieces. There's a lot of trial and error with that. There's a lot of discomfort with that in times. I think with people getting that responsibility, maybe, not sure what to do with it. They've never had it before. You have managers trying to understand like, hey, if I give this thing up, what does that, truly mean? And then I think as you look at success, I think talking about success, both in the product that's being delivered as well as that part of it, I think that's it's a hard message to convey to folks, because everyone's like, hey, what's the velocity? How many sprints have you accomplished? Those are all great parts, but I think those challenges with, I think the cultural change, I think that's, one we've gone through quite a bit, but I think it's been really hard to articulate how far we've come and really get people to understand why. Some of that stuff, it's kind of Michael's point on like J-curve, like we've got a bit of a hockey stick. We kind of have slower growth in the beginning with all this change, and then it starts the acceleration as you kind of you cross your inflection point.
And I think from a I think rolling around to communication again, there's doing Agile and there's being Agile, and then there's doing Agile in a way that maybe is functional but not elegant, and then the entire spectrum in between of those things. I think one of the things I've noticed is people get excited and they start to resonate a little bit when they see it done well, and really click. And when it's not clicking, it's struggle. It's hard, and there's a lot of consternation, a lot of concern, and a lot of energy being spent there. But then when it clicks, it's just like the curtain pulls back and the lights are shining and it's wonderful. And you've got to be able to see and capitalize those moments so that there's not that misconception of what good Agile might be, right? And it's not you manage to keep your daily Scrum to 15 minutes every day. That's important, but are you going to meet your sprint goals? Are you going to do all the things, And so I feel like that has been an interesting observation across the spectrum of things.
Yeah, I think you were both mentioning some examples of things that are easy to measure. If they're doing Scrum, how many story points do you have in the sprint? What's your velocity, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you get into things like how Agile are we, it's much more nebulous. Are we collaborating with our customers? Are we delivering working software frequently? Are we paying attention to technical excellence? Well, that's not you are or you aren't. That's a spectrum from you might not be to absolutely. And organizations are going to be in between on lots of those. So much harder to measure. I also found one other thing interesting then I'll hand it off to Andrea right after this. And the other thing that I think is interesting is we aren't talking about this as an agile transformation from point A to point B and stop. You're intentionally using, and we're using this conversation, the concept of a journey. You're going from somewhere to somewhere, and there's a pretty good chance when you get to that place you thought you were going to, there will be yet another destination in mind. So I think that's an important mindset shift. So apologize, Andrea, I stepped on you.
No, actually, that was a great lead into for me to yes and to, because one of the things I was hearing is, things will get hard. As Dan just said, it's a journey. And so we're going to hit different potholes, and we're going to have some great highs and some challenges. And I guess the question I would have is, how do you create an environment, a culture, a way of working that people who are naturally want to go back to their comfort zone when things get hard, they want to go back to how they've always done it. That's just human nature. How do you propel them and keep them moving forward and moving through that hardness? Have you seen any special techniques that have worked? And again, we know it's going to be unique for people and the different levels in the organization, but what have you seen?
Man, if I had that secret sauce on that one, I'd be a very rich man right about now. I think through all of this. Honestly, I think we've tried a lot of different things, right? I think we try to, when we see some of the behaviors, we try to incentivize it, right? So we have an internal recognition system where we give points out for things, and it's kind of a social setup. So it's kind of a Facebooky like piece, so the whole organization can see it, and you can use it as a way to disseminate out. So we take that as an opportunity, and it allows you to also add in other folks. So we'll add in some senior folks in there too, so they can see it. I think within that. We do, Michael and I hold a lot of pull-ups with folks. We've got some sessions that we do, community practices that we run with the AgileThought teams. Yeah, I think the other ones too is just pick up the phone and reaching out to folks, kind of chatting with them. Hey, shooting them a quick text like, hey, I thought you really did this really well today, and kind of pulling it forward. But it's I think it's interesting because especially in this environment with COVID, we're not really all in the same room together do this. So these sessions are 65 people or in a Zoom, right? So the reach out and kind of pat on the back. It's all virtual, and trying to find that way has been super unique, right? I think things that worked well, I think in my prior life when I was sitting across the table from folks, are quite unique here. But I think we've tried a lot of things and constantly get feedback from the teams. Hey, what's working well? We love you being here. Even little things at times, having some of our seniors attend some of the sprint reviews, right? Or be part of another meeting that that helps give them context and feedback that shows that, hey, you know what, they are interested. We are doing this for a reason. So I think having that reminder. But I know Michael does a lot of other ones as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things I sort of lean into is disciplines in leadership that are not agile per se, but definitely align with or complement agile things as well. And so when I think about meeting people where they are, it's not just their appetite to change or their propensity to be agilists. It's also, are they extroverted or introverted? Do they want the recognition, or do they prefer the private, the private accolades? And everybody's different. Everybody's going to respond differently, and being able to sort of pulse the teams and the room and the scenarios to find the right way to make a connection, the right way to celebrate a victory, or and it's going to sound weird, but celebrate a defeat, right? Or celebrate something that doesn't work because you've just found a thing that you can improve, or you've just prevented a larger problem later by finding it up front, or whatever the scenario is. But really, people respond so differently to some of these scenarios. You can read the management manual that says praise out loud, and then you do that with someone who's more introverted or more private, and they are very uncomfortable in these, and it's one of those things, just being aware of the room and of the situation. So interesting.
Michael, you kind of jogged something else for me. I think the other part too is not just what we do, but how we do it. this whole shadow of a leader kind of concept, like, us at the leadership level within the program and really outside of it, how do we conduct ourselves? Like when the days get really hard, we're going to be a little bit of how we kind of feel and what our aura is in those days on the tough days translates out. So it's, I think we talk a lot about that as a leadership team, and, it puts more, because in your leader role, you're on show all the time, and you really need to be kind of mindful of, hey, it's okay, and you've got to kind of show how you feel. Like, and I think, but that's not to say don't hide if you're frustrated, or if you're stressed, right? The team should be able to see that too, right? Because if you don't acknowledge that this is hard and like everything, like, hey, everything's perfect and fantastic, if you're constantly swinging that optimism side, and then I think you start losing the genuineness of, I think, of you as a leader. So I think trying is find that balance to pull folks through, and I think also trying to be transparent too. I think we talk about that a lot. How are we kind of conducting ourselves, both on the positive and kind of the share where, hey, we get it. This is hard. And where can we all kind of roll up our sleeves?
I've seen some examples where leaders have, in those moments of stress, said some things and never walked them back. And those have been catastrophic in one situation for the organization that was said. That directly led to a bunch of turnover because people had been working for a very long time under a lot of stressful conditions. And the leader kind of lost it in the meeting and never walked it back. But I have seen in some instances in Frazier organization where people have said something and then they pretty quickly went, I apologize. That wasn't, the stress got to me, etc. And just doing a little mea culpa, apologizing to the injured party quickly in the forum where the grievance happened, it's super powerful because we're all humans. Everybody's gonna, lose their cool. And I think that, like you said, is pretty important.
Well, and I think as leaders, there's often a position of bravado or like Joe said, it's not always roses and shiny, and you've got to be transparent enough to say, look, we're going to embrace this. It's not ideal, but we're here and we're going to go to the next thing. And really that openness and transparency helps to build empathy. And even within teams, if you've got a dev that's frustrated at an analyst or a QA or whatever, and there's not that empathy of, this is why this matters, this is why I'm concerned or I'm now upset about the scenario, that it's not there. And then to complement that with respect, you can get past the emotional aspects of it to we've got a problem to solve. We have a situation that needs to be, we need to retrospect and correct something or address something or whatever we're doing.
Yeah, and I think as we talk about the culture and the mindset is getting everyone in the organization to embrace and to support through actions and words that there's definite value in creating a culture of learning, that it's okay to learn. The thing is, we lose out when we're fearful of inspecting and adapting, and we grow through that, those learnings, and that's where some of our best innovation comes from. So when you think about, asking teams to work and sustain when things get hard, it's so much more helpful if they feel safe, like there's a culture that supports experimentation and understands that we may make incremental mistakes, but we're going to learn from them and prevent something, maybe bigger from happening. And when you're working within your organizations today, we talk a lot about how leaders are coming to the table through these agile journeys. Do you see them maybe not on day one understanding the value of experimentation and through actually delivering, product and services? Do you see a shift in people, like appreciating in how they show up, even how they use different language with the teams?
I do, absolutely. I mean, and again, it's all in context. I think that oftentimes you will see a logical recognition of the value of the statement, but the behaviors are harder to get to because that's a little more meaty, a little bit more or a little bit less discrete, right? That's going to be a long-term difference. But we can say, it's real easy to say experimentation is how the top companies are increasing revenue 30%, blah, 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 right? But then when you're under the radar and it says, I got to do this thing by next Friday, or we're going to lose the bid, or blah, blah, blah. It's definitely harder to foster that growth room and that experimentation room, especially if there's some risk and there's some uncertainty, right? Because we all like to manage risk. We all like to close off all of those big question marks and big scary scenarios of things going badly. And that then starts to look like a posture of taking no risk, or of planning so much that there is no ambiguity, there is no wiggle. And then you're not experimenting, you're just executing.
Mm-hmm. I think the concept of managing risk is one where I feel like agile methods can help a bunch. And in the first decade of my career, it was waterfall software development. And we tried to manage risk by doing requirements and then doing design and rigorous sign off and squeezing the testing at the end because we ran out of time, and then we'd do a post-mortem, and it was always, the reason this went wrong is because we didn't do the requirements well enough. We didn't do the design well enough, and so we just doubled down on all that stuff. And with agile methods now, it's like, hey, this might not work. Let's go try it now and do a proof of concept, do a spike, deliver a slice, do a thin bit. And that's a massively different way of managing risk.
I think it's tough too. I think people they're like, hey, the trial and error, if you have like 3 or 4, let's say, things that don't work out kind of in a row, I think you're out, the outside groups kind of look at it like, okay, well, all they're doing is nothing's working, right? So how is this any different, and what do I get out of it? So I think there's definitely a lot of like, I hear you, but show me, right? And we had that with some of our projects last year, and but it had a small subset, I think, of impact in the organization. And then now we're on some of the larger ones. You're kind of sitting in there as well as we kind of go through. But I think too, it requires you to think about this risk a little bit differently, right? I think there should be more of a continual, like what is a risk appetite, right? I think in the past it was like, okay, we think of waterfall, I'm going to get this thing and I'm going to put everything into it, right? Well, we can go a little bit sooner. It'll be a smaller kind of construct of what we'll do, and then we'll kind of build up to it. But I think, be it waterfall, be it agile, I think being very clear on what it is that you're working towards, what are the goals, what are the successes, and what risks are true game-changing risks. Like, okay, to Michael's point, we're a heavily regulated industry, being a credit union. So there's some things like those, there's risks there that there's hard stops, right? If those sitting there, if we can't address them, we have to pull forward. And the other ones, it could be more business risk, or what we want to kind of pull through. How much like tech debt do we want to take in? How complete a particular item is to get it out there and get the feedback. So I think getting people comfortable that I think risk is always sounds like a bad term. But then getting people understanding like it's not risk for risk's sake. So like hey, the hardcore risks that are from a regulation, yes, those get addressed. But it's breaking out the other ones and how to have a really good conversation with what they remain as, and really how does that tie back to the objectives you had originally. I think that's been a work in progress for us, even as we've gone through this, as we've been trying to pull the different pieces through. And really, I think the hard part with Agile, it's like, hey, especially when you're building something from scratch, when do you fold in your partners, right? Hey, do you want them, you bring them in too soon? Like, hey, it's a lot of technical API work. Bring them too late, they don't have the different pieces. So I think, we've been, playing around with that kind of dynamic too. Like what's the best time to fold folks in? And when do they want to be folded in? Because each leader is like, hey, you know what? I want to see it when you're like 90% there. Others want to see it when they're 30% there. So trying to figure out that ebb and flow as we've been going through this is, again, I guess the constant theme of what we talked about thus far, it's people, right? And so is the common denominator in all this, and trying to solve for each one is a little bit different.
I love that. And I think, what I like about the Agile frameworks is the way that they work is they allow those opportunities throughout the time together for inspection and adaptation. So maybe one of your stakeholders isn't ready to consume that information for whatever reason, wherever you are in your product development. But the framework allows for them to be invited in it when they are ready, And it really does lend itself for that transparency. And trust comes from honesty, right? And I think one of the principles and practices of these agile frameworks is we're going to show you how we're doing as we're going to go. We're going to show you the good, the bad, and the ugly. But how do I get you to trust me? Well, you trust that I'm giving you authentic and true messaging. But you also are seeing incremental value delivery, going back to what you guys are saying. Without both sides of that equation, people are going to lose interest because it's just a mess of experimentation. And what do I get for that? So I that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the framework. It can be adapted based on the individual's needs. It supports those principles when you're ready for participation from stakeholders, not from the team. They need to do it all the time.
So you were, well, you brought in the team there, and that makes me think of the concept of roles and responsibilities. Scrum prescribes responsibilities for the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the developers. But outside of that, there isn't a one way to do roles and responsibilities. If somebody's selling that to you, run away, right? Because they're lying or they're not being sensitive to the context with which you're in. But so how have you folks seen patterns on roles and responsibilities, especially around like empowerment and decision making? And it's a complex topic. So how have you seen some of those things fit? Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
It absolutely is a complex topic. And again, there's the team level and around the team, the peripheral. And so I think obviously it's one thing to say, project managers look like this, scrum masters look like that. Here's how they compare and contrast, and here's how they don't. And beware if you think any one of these could become any one of those with just going to the cert classes, right? And so, that's one layer, and that's an interesting one, because oftentimes it's not just team is now a different team, go do the thing differently. It's also communicating outward to say this team is different by design, and these roles are intentionally not those roles when you're talking to, say, your HR peers or your some of your waterfall teams that are comparing and contrasting the different cadences, the different ways of doing things. And then ultimately when you're doing, when we do executive reporting and even the tactical reporting at like the PMO levels and things, hey, we're this much % complete with this project. How much % complete is your Scrum team? And you go, well, it's not quite like that. It's like we're progressing on our roadmaps, and the roadmaps look like that. And there's that piece. Then there's also, I am a QA, I am an analyst. Well, now we're Scrum developers, and I need you to help me finish the sprint successfully. Oh, that's a whole new thing, right? And then inside the team, there's that. But then around the team, or even outside the team, there's, hey, this is participating in a larger program, a larger portfolio, and we need delivery ensured over here to get the thing we want over there, both across the borders and in the lanes, right? So sometimes I need the traditional teams to deliver their project so I can consume it in my Scrum roadmap. Sometimes I need to deliver so that they can consume it. And it's complex. It's very, very interesting. So when you talk about, and I know you said frameworks, Andrea, talk about scaling methodologies, and there's no one solution there either. And there's, and the layers of onion just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we talk about bringing program management in and leadership and, analytics around the sides, and data people want to come in and play with all this nice juicy data that we have.
Yeah, I think building on that, I think both your points, right? There's these great frameworks out there that outline, here's A, here's B, here's C, right? And I agree with you, Dan. If anyone says like this is the Bible, this is the way you do it, just take this and you'll be perfectly fine, run. Because I think the challenges are there's those pieces there, and then you got to layer in the expectations that you want out of each role. What does good look like for you in each one? And that needs to be somewhat driven by the principles, but also really driven by your organization, right? How does your organization kind of manage the different pieces? And I would also caution anyone, like this is a conversation we have maybe monthly, as we go through right now, because like we learn as we go through it, it evolves. Hey, there's good behaviors we see. Hey, we didn't really talk about that one. Let's kind of dive into it. But if you're not reviewing it on a regular basis, I would worry, because it's not a set it and forget it type of thing. It's one of those ones you have to kind of come back and look at, because the best part about, like, I think that what we've done with this is, like, you take some assumptions, or you make a hypothesis, right? This is the path we're going to take, just so we move forward. But you have to come back and validate that as you're going through, and see what tweaks and what changes we make. And hey, the assumptions we made up front, okay, we've got, maybe we've got 60% of a type of personality, more than we thought we did, right? And so we want to kind of change it around. But yeah, this is one, in addition to how you communicate out, how you communicate progress. I think because you're also kind of challenging, you a little bit that Agile has a lot of great information, but how do you channel some of that information to the senior leaders? Because I think you've got on the waterfall side, and a little bit of false confidence, right? At times you've got your Gantt chart, you've got your task list, and you can say, okay, we're % done, but that doesn't really mean, you may be % done, but are you 50% behind schedule, right? And I think, esoterically flip it around, like, hey, we're 60, there's 50 story points for this particular feature and we're 40% done. I think getting people to understand that, so it gives them a level of doneness, but I think it's harder for them to digest what that means. So I think really one of the learnings I think we've had in this is, how do you be a little bit more prescriptive? It's like, okay, yep, here's this percentage piece, but let's start showing a little bit more. That 40% equates to these steps in this particular feature, and taking the conversational and turn it into the visuals, so people could see, like, okay, here's the end, like the whole thing is this whole path is what we're going to deliver to our members, right? So let's pull, or employees with different pieces. So let's orient on that part, and then use the data to pull it through. It's one that, we're as we kind of inspect and adapt, that's one that we're trying to, evolve into as we've been going through. Because I think to help people pull through, a big thing for us is, we're constantly educating, right? Everyone to understand where we're at, and so they can feel informed, and then they can feel involved and really part of the journey. And I think, there's, I don't know, I think we've said it, kind of constantly through here. I think the only constant we've had in this is that we've been constantly evolving throughout the entire process.
To add on to something you were just saying, because the word done was used. What is, and I know as Agilists, we spend time defining what done means. And I think when you're talking to your leaders and people who might not be in the day-to-day of your Agile journey, is getting them to understand what done means and getting that agreement on what that word is saying. Because the value is showing them, if you're doing software development, obviously working increments of that working software. And you contrast that to a waterfall, where what does done mean as you go through, stage and phases of that. So getting them to appreciate and understand that they're actually seeing increments that we could be putting into the hands of our members, right? Or the hands of our user. We don't have to give you everything today, because there's value in these increments. And maybe that's an opportunity to shift them to understanding and looking at the word done differently.
I keyed on done as well, and so I'm glad you said that. And honestly, as you said right up front, meet them where they are, right? Where we are today, done equals this, but we aspire to change the definition of done later to something that looks more like that, and in line with, getting it into production sooner, getting it in the hands of the users sooner. And maybe we're not that today, because we have a rigid development and release process with auditable controls, et cetera. And we have to work on, how we approach solving those problems while we work on the engineering to build the thing. And done today and done tomorrow might look significantly different based on our journey and desire to change that definition. We might not be ready to do that just yet.
I think that's a great segue, and I don't want to kidnap this conversation, but as we're coming to the end of our time together, I guess my question for you, as you've been doing your Agile journeys here and other places, where do you see opportunities for it to go to, evolve to? Are there things on the horizons that you are intrigued about exploring further in your Agile journey?
Absolutely. I think just, and of course, this goes back to there's all these complementary things that you can layer in with your agility. When you think about, in my case, annual planning processes and HR compensation and procurement and all these things, we've got opportunities there. We've got opportunities to look at our roadmaps from a like horizons types of thinking, where what we're going to do this quarter, this year versus 5 years from now. And we don't have to have that highly tuned definition and project list for next year, the year after, because the world won't be the same. I mean, last year, working from home, perfect example. We went through the assessment process with you guys on location. Then we sent everyone home for the rest of the year. And, how do you kick off a remote journey when it's new to everyone,
I mean, I think Michael hit on a lot of really good ones. Part of me, and as I look at some of the stuff, as we evolve, yes, there's the things of getting more teams on board, articulating the value of how each team drives the organization more. But I think one of the things I'm most interested in kind of getting to that point, and it wasn't really one we had gotten to in my prior lives either, so I'm not really sure if this is a true destination or an ideal to hit, but it's that we're not talking about it as much every day. It's just there. It is what we do. It's ingrained into us, versus constantly talking about like, hey, we're making this transition. Like, to me, that, like, if we can get to that point, we've got a lot of these things that, embedded into kind of our thought process, our culture, and the different pieces. Like, so that to me, like, so we got a whole bunch of things that we want to do and accomplish. But that, like, that feeling is one I know is kind of what I have out there in my mind.
So less talking about the agile stuff and more talking about, hey, how are our customers responding? What should we be getting to them next? Hey, are we putting ourselves on a technical footing to expand rapidly? Are we improving like those types of things? Is that what you were referring to, Joe?
Yeah, because if you look at your other projects, right, you're not constantly, oh, this is a waterfall project. You're not talking and debating, how's this waterfall process going to work, help or not? Like, the process, right? It already exists. Getting to that point, I think, within our organization, where it's just, hey, this is a path for us to move forward. We're generating value for our members, and really, we're less about the mechanics. And it's to your point, Dan. It's the deliverables of, hey, we need to get more things to our members faster, right? And how do we tie it back to our strategy, right? We want to do good for our members, right? So how do we do that in a much more rapid cycle? That's where I'd love to see it be.
Honestly, the fact that you would need a decision point somewhere to say, are we going to do this waterfall or agile, is sort of indicative of that need to move past that, right? It's really, I need a thing, we're doing the thing, right? If it's a opportunity, it's a pressing need, suddenly we had to do loans for businesses, all of a sudden everybody was chomping at the bit to figure out how to solve that problem. And the ones that solved it the quickest and the ones that were able to put it in people's hands realized more benefit than the ones that couldn't do that for any given reason.
So it moves from a philosophy and to actually just being how you work, how you come to the table and problem solving, because every day it's about the new problems that need to be solved. And we're just agile in our thinking, and it applies beyond just product development. It's how we approach our goals and objectives. It's how we figure out what value means to our members. I love that. And is it a destination, or is it just another stop on the journey? That's a great question.
Yeah, Joe, you used the phrase "do good," right? That's part of what you guys are doing at VyStar. Do good, bank better. And I think as you talk about then outcomes for your members, there are a couple pretty awesome examples. One, like you said, was the new programs that came out around COVID for businesses. That was turned around insanely fast, and it was done. Getting your remote workforce enabled was done insanely fast, where it might have only been a pilot perhaps in that 12 months. And it's interesting to try to think about how can an organization capture that sense of urgency and focus around all the other stuff that seems like, well, we planned it for 18 months, so we're going to do it for 18 months, as opposed to, no, this is the priority, and how do we get after it quickly?
Absolutely.
We're coming towards the backside of our time together, and I thought I'd just ask you for some closing thoughts around Agile journeys. You've been on a few of them each, and maybe just what are some closing thoughts around that? I guess we'll start with Andrea, and then we'll work around to Michael and Joe, and we'll call it a day.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think we've been sharing some of our sentiments. Each journey is different, and understanding that it isn't a one and done, that it is a progression, and it will be filled with those learning opportunities. And how do we best utilize that to make the adaptions and the pivots that we need to continue to see value from the journey? So I think my sentiment to those who are embarking or within their journeys is hang in there. And when you move from just doing to being agile, you'll feel that goosebump on those days, and it will radiate out. So hang in there.
I think to follow Andrea there with that, one of the things to me that seems to be an indicator of that transformation is your approach to the transformation itself. You know, if you have a 15-point dimensional plan of things you're going to do differently to get there, can you focus on one? Can you focus on one or two? Or, you know, where's your focus? Where's your mindfulness around what are we doing right now versus what are we doing 6 months from now, 9 months from now? You know, we call it a journey. You could call it a roadmap. You could call it, you know, a lot of different things. But when you start putting the pins on the map of where you want to be, if it's engineering discipline, if it's the process, if it's, you know, all those other things we've already talked about, if you're trying to eat the whole elephant, most of the literature says that's harder to do. You know, you're not going to be successful unless you commit significantly more effort to that goal, especially if you're in an industry or, you know, in a situation where you have multiple competing priorities, and this is just a piece of the whole concern, you know, or worse, if it's just something that's sort of invisible to the overarching objectives, and you've got to get there because that's the only way you can get those overarching objectives, but it's really not necessarily top of mind or top of the pile.
Yeah, those are great points. I think the things I would add on to those pieces is, you know, I think don't forget it's a people game. I think in the end, right? There's a lot of this. It's definitely a software development piece, but that's just a component of what sits here. It's going to be the people, and I would sweat the details on roles and responsibilities and expectations of roles. I would sweat the details on communications and how you want to kind of align team structure, and even think about recognition, right? But while you sweat those details, don't prevent from starting, right? Sweat some details, put a plan in place, be transparent with how you want to go about it. But make sure the teams, your leadership team, and then your leaders outside you know kind of how you're approaching and how you're going to adapt and solve it. And I think that those are the things I would sweat. And then really within the communication piece, it's, you know, it's the hard one because like this is a cultural transformation that you're sitting in. So you're going to be very inwardly focused at times, and you're like, oh, I'll get to that email or this thing, you know, kind of share this little update, you know, with the people who are sitting outside, you know, and we felt that, you know, at times as well. As much as you can, try to keep the communication about, you know, kind of to the teams that are surrounding you, your leadership teams. They sound simple, right? I mean, even if you think you're doing it monthly, you may want to pull up the cadence to every other week, or even kind of pull ups with some of your peers. I think because everyone's interested with what's going on, and you want to kind of make sure that they're getting that insight, that understanding, because a lot is there and a lot's going to be asked of them, right? As you go through it. So like, I would just, think about those things, have strong plans in place, but also, I think the biggest piece is just take steps forward and just to keep moving, right? It's never going to be a perfect scenario. You'll never find that silver bullet. So just kind of keep moving forward. You'll learn, you'll grow. And I think that's probably the best thing. And have a little bit of fun with it. Have some, let your teams be creative, right? Encourage them to come up with fun names. And we've gone down the path where some of our teams are creating stickers and logos, right? Let them have some fun and embrace kind of the change that's in there.
For sure. Yeah, if you're not having fun doing what you're doing, I'm not sure what the point is. So hopefully you folks have had the fun that I did today. I want to appreciate Andrea, Michael, Joe. Thank you for joining and sharing about Agile journeys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.